Welcome to the Sunday special on Top Med Talk. It's a potpourri of our favourite longer pieces, ideal for downloading and enjoying when you have a little bit more time. Top Med Talk.
Welcome to Top Med Talk. I'm Desiree, Chappell, host and managing editor of Top Med Talk, and I'm joined by Saul Aronson, our friend of Top Med Talk, and Monty Mythen, editor-in-chief. Hello, Monty.
Hey, Desiree.
We wanted to sit down while we're here to talk about some recent publications that came out in the BJA, the British Journal of Anesthesia.
Yeah, well, first I think we should mention our relationship with the Perioperative Quality Initiative, or POQI, POQI.org. Formed relatively recently to pull people together to discuss complicated topics and pull together consensus statements. And 6 have been completed so far, and I think about 15 of the publications are out. So this is one of the sort of I'm pointing at a sign here, which is not great radio.
Right, it's not great podcasting.
So at a stand behind us, we have the front cover of the BJA, which has this diagram appeared on the front cover of the May edition of the BJA, because within that, there were 4 publications about perioperative blood pressure. Now, myself and Sol were both at a meeting in London, where we got together a group of experts with the challenge to try and summarise what we believe the current situation is with regards to the physiology of blood pressure, paper number 1, Ackland et al. And then the 3 other papers were preoperative blood pressure, intraoperative blood pressure, and postoperative blood pressure. And if I may, I've got a takeaway from each of them to get the conversation going.
Yeah, I think it's great.
Like this diagram here shows, what the physiology paper reminded me was about the autoregulation.
He's pointing to the diagram for those.
No, we're going to put this. We're going to put this up. We're actually probably going to cut this
for those of you
right
listening.
Okay, for those of you
we're
listening,
going to cut that.
For those of you listening and listening to the snooker, I just want you to know that the red ball is behind the green.
Okay, so that being said, we are going to put all of put the infographics up. And link them.
The front cover, the infographic there, relates to the idea of autoregulation in the body, i.e. over a range of pressures, flow is maintained. Now, we all know that. But the thing I was reminded of is that the autoregulation point is different in different parts of the body, and as you age and depending on your pre-existing conditions, that autoregulation points can be quite different places. So the splanchnic bed might be quite different to the kidney and the brain. So that's one point I took away from that. From the preoperative one, I took away the fact that there were no major surprises, unless I was sleeping during it. The idea that there's a particular number of blood pressure, hypertension in particular, that should result in cancelling a case. We still don't have that number, but a pragmatic recommendation is if the systolic is very high, you probably should refer them to get sorted out, because it's greater likelihood someone's going to cancel it on the day anyway, and it's a grey sort of known unknown area. In the intraoperative one for non-cardiac surgery, it's let's call it the map of 65. The paper actually says 60 to 70, but if we are looking for a current working threshold, for most cases it's 65. And for the postoperative bit, the takeaway for me was how little we know about postoperative blood pressure measurement, how infrequently it's measured if you're sent back to the floor, and the signal of harm postoperatively is multiple times higher than the signal of harm intraoperatively that we're currently stressing about. Those are my takeaways. Over to you, Sol.
So we have Saul Aronson. I didn't introduce you yet, Saul. Saul Aronson, our friend with Top Med Talk. And Saul, what do you think about some of the things that came out of these papers?
I think that was a wonderful summary. What is underappreciated by that pithy summary is it really was the result of thousands of hours of collective research by a number of individuals to really gather the world's literature, reasonable gathering of the world's literature on blood pressure, to tee up a 2-day intensive session of stakeholders sitting around a long table and beating up the data and sort of, defending their positions. And what Monty just described is what came out of that intensive session. So the process itself was rigorous and thorough.
Exhausting.
Yeah, and exhausting.
That's for all the POQIs, right? That is the process, right?
Well, in this POQI, we were on the transition from, because everyone likes you to grade.
Yes, to grade the evidence.
And the POQI, which came out of the ADQI philosophy, the acute, used to be dialysis, now disease quality initiative, was quite anti-grade. That doesn't sound.
Yeah.
It wasn't very keen on getting sucked into the grading process. So, in other words, their original philosophy is you have to look at the evidence in a systematic way. Then, and if you have experts, it's very rare that you discover evidence that you didn't know when you walked into the room. But let's do that process systematically. But then let's accept the fact that people have got to go to work and do something about it next week. So a bit of opinion is okay, providing it's majority opinion or ideally everyone's opinion. And when you have disagreements of opinion, you document them. Now, from this pokey, which is sort of mid-pokey, to the most recent pokies, they've been sucked into grade, which I'm not completely happy with, but it's hard to get past the reviewers unless you play the grade game. I know where you are on that, Sol.
Yeah, no, I think we have to be practical and pragmatic, and the current, if you will, philosophy and receptiveness to those sorts of processes are such that those are the hurdles that we have to get over. So we didn't acquiesce, we just conformed to the reality. It's a methodologic philosophy rather than dogma, and I think data is data, facts are facts, and what we don't know, and that doesn't change regardless of the methodology.
Well, and that doesn't really affect what you're saying, really. I mean, how does it?
But I mean, my prejudice, my bias in all of this is having done been involved in very protracted, detailed, graded evaluations, particularly for our national body called NICE. 1.5, 2 years of having teams of experts torture the data and then grade it. We were none the wiser after 2 years than we were when we walked in the room. So I know it's a bit. Some people don't like the sort of suggestion of the fact that if you accumulate experts, now you have to do a systematic review of some form. You have to do a PubMed search. You have to have your search terms. But you can really spend a lot of time, energy, effort, and money. And I'm not as convinced about that endeavour than I am of collectively producing the outputs. Now, they mustn't be biased by the fact. They mustn't be overwhelmed by opinion.
Yeah.
But I think you can waste a lot of money on grading.
Interesting.
It's just but I just thought
it really is. It's a philosophy.
It's a philosophy, yeah.
And there's nothing dogmatic about it. It really is just a matter of how you choose to interpret the science. And the science isn't perfect. We all know that as scientists, as clinical scientists, we all know that. But you have to translate it. You have to apply it. And for it to be effective and meaningful, you have to use it. And so the pokey process and others that use different methodologies are really all about trying to collate and coalesce the science in a practical way to make it usable. And so the back full circle, what Monty very nicely and efficiently provided us with sort of the highlights of those 4 papers that are in the BJA now, underscore, if you will, the propensity of data and the science with its methodologic processes to apply. And I think that however subtle that may be, it's meaningful. It really is really meaningful to, firstly, paper number 1, take us back to the essence of what blood pressure means, what it is a derivative of, what its implications are. I think we start with the core, and I think that was a really solid foundational way of beginning the process. And everybody wants to know, practically speaking, what about the blood pressure? What is meaningful blood pressure? What is intolerable and what is tolerable blood pressure? And I think what we've nicely done, Monty, is we've gathered the evidence in those domains and offered our suggestions for how we can practice as clinicians. And I think that into itself, I would add that we've parsed out that the data seems to have splintered into cardiac versus non-cardiac in terms of what are meaningful thresholds, both high and low, and or if there are meaningful thresholds, high and or low, preoperatively, intraoperatively, and postoperatively. And when you parse it in that way, it makes it easier to understand the sea of data that.
Can I pursue that for a second, Desiree? Because we spent quite a lot of time exploring the cardiac versus non-cardiac. So our original reference point was to say we need a sort of reference point for this paper. So it's adult, major, non-cardiac
Cardiac.
surgery, which is where the majority of literature that we were considering at the time related to. But there's been a lot of work done, much of it by Sol and his colleagues, in cardiac surgery. Why are we getting a different message from cardiac, or is it a methodological issue?
I don't think it's methodologic. I think it is a population difference. I wish I could come up with a teleologic explanation for why that population seems. And let's be clear: the difference is in the strength of a signal for a high blood pressure to be meaningful. There is essentially no difference in the strength of a signal for a low blood pressure to be meaningful. That is universally true regardless of whether or not you are a cardiac or non-cardiac.
So the cardiac surgical patient, a threshold of a MAP of 65 is a reasonable reference point.
Absolutely. And that stays universally true. Where we found a difference principally was a hypertension defined as systolic hypertensive either by pulse pressure hypertension or isolated systolic blood pressure hypertension to be a meaningful metric for predicting adverse events. Such a strength of a signal that if you are going to have cardiac surgery, if you are a patient who is deemed cardiac by the virtue of a cardiac surgical declaration, a pulse pressure above 60, certainly 80, portends significant independent adverse outcomes with respect to cerebral, renal, and cardiac dysfunction outcome. These are all database, post-operative evaluations, so they're associations. Chuck Hogue, years ago, looked at this for a cerebral dysfunction outcome. Manny Fonts and I looked at separate databases for cardiac, and of course we've demonstrated this for renal. So that has persisted to be strength. And there's a very nice European study of cardiac surgical composites that showed the same consistency of strength of that signal for high blood pressure predicting badness.
And you're saying it's both systolic hypertension on its own and the size of the pulse pressure being the gap between diastolic and systolic.
That is exactly right.
Okay. And do you think that's got something to do with bypass?
I don't, but it hasn't been teased out. So preoperative blood pressure portends adverse outcome.
Yep.
Independent of that observation is intraoperative hypertension defined by systolic non-bypass portends outcome. And we also looked at, years ago with the Charité Hospital in Berlin, postoperative hypertension also portends bad outcome.
So, Desiree, if I may, just a plug, because we'll go into each one. I know we've got a wrap now. We'll go into each one of these papers in greater detail. But www.poqi.org will get it into the show note.
Yep.
And the May edition of the BJA.
Yep.
And the most recent edition of Anesthesia and Analgesia has some more pokey papers about the opioid-dependent patient and this, broadly speaking, the opioid crisis. So please do, everyone, look them up. The infographics are all open source. The publications are all open source.
Yeah, and all that actually is listed on the Pokey site that you can get all that and then have the links to the papers and all that good stuff. So fantastic. Well, we will definitely come back to that. Thank you all for listening, and cheers.
Top Med Talk. Nate Aronson here. Thanks for listening to Top Med Talk. Now, before we let you go, it's important that we remind you to subscribe to Top Med Talk. That way you'll never, ever miss another episode. Also, if we could encourage you to join us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, pretty much every single social media platform, we're there. Join us. And finally, check out topmedtalk.com. If you go to our website, you can subscribe to email updates. That way we can always tell you where we're going to be, what we're going to be doing, and how you can join us. topmedtalk.com, and click on the section marked email updates. Finally, Top Med Talk is proud to act as the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about them as well. ebpom.org is their website. That's ebpom.org. And if you go to ebpom.org/meetings, you can find out about some of the wonderful meetings that we attend and cover across the year here on Top Med Talk. That's ebpom.org/meetings.